And now, our feature presentation.
In the nature of the album art is done by just totally recontextualizing certain pieces of software that have a very fixed use, and I think have a very, like, people assume what art made with this software will look like.
Yeah. Is this on the record or off the record?
This is on the record.
Okay,
I'm not going to say what the software is, and I'm not going to describe it further, but I will say that in a very chiptune way, I'm using very standard media software to make something truly weird and not deliberate. And
that's awesome.
And it lags my very nice computer's RAM. And I'm like, that's what you want. I want the files to crash. What's the point of having all this power if you can't just, like, misuse it?
Yeah.
For something silly, you know. And you know, GPUs are great for video games, but I think they're even funnier when you use them to just do weird stuff.
Yeah,
and
totally.
Just, like, do stuff the wrong way.
That's how I feel with my entire time in grad school with having access to, like, really nice cinema cameras, and then it's like, okay, here I have access to a 6K camera, and I'm gonna point it at a TV screen, and you're gonna see every single phosphor dot.
Yeah.
And if I'm filming static, where it's just like white and black visual noise, you're going to see the yellow, red, and blue stripes that make up each phosphor dot. Like, you're gonna, like, feel how analog this really is.
Yeah.
And there's something, like, very beautiful about the kind of, like, misuse of it. And I know we both are, like, very interested in kind of, like, hacking, like hardware hacking as well.
Yeah. What you mentioned is very much what I would have considered the mentality of chiptune. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what chiptune was versus what it is now, because I think the scene, just as the enjoyment of retro video games has changed so much in the last 5-6 years, so has chiptune. But my favorite part about it was never about, oh, you know this thing that plays Pokemon? Well, it can make dance music? Whoa, what? No, it was like, what's the cheapest synthesizer you have in your house?
Yeah.
It's actually the Game Boy.
Yeah.
Right? When I first started making chiptune, I spent $40 on a flash cart, and I had the Game Boy already. And that was it. And I wrote, my sophomore year of high school, I wrote my first couple albums on that. And I feel like with production now, even with weirdo gear, there is a public consciousness of a right way to do it.
Yeah.
And that I don't like.
Yeah.
Because chiptune or dance music for me was never about the right way to do things. It was about how fast and cheap can you do it, and pushing whatever you have fast and cheap to make something, like, really cool.
Yeah.
And that goes back to hacking. And just as technology evolves, the nature of it evolves. But we're at a point where pushing the limits of something or extended technique doesn't feel quite as hits the same note. And so that's why I really still find myself diving back to, like, older or more boutique hardware because it can do less.
Yeah, totally.
Not because because it's selective about what it does.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most interesting thing about any sort of artistic technology.
Yeah.
Is where do you draw the line of what it can and can't do, and how does that inspire you to make art?
Totally.
And I think that there's more of that give and take with older stuff, which is why I'm still find myself very drawn to it, more so than any sort of nostalgia. You know, a lot of this stuff, you know, when I was getting started, Skrillex and Deadmau5 and stuff were big. You know, I wouldn't call that vintage music by any means. I wouldn't call that old school.
Yeah.
But the older stuff still appealed to me because it was smaller in scope.
Yeah.
And simpler to produce, just because of what was available.
Yeah.
And so
like with video stuff, like with VHS, I do have like a bit of nostalgia for it, but it's like, I know with any memory, you're essentially like remaking it in your head every time, but it's very much like that, because the only time I had VHS before being an adult was as a very little kid. And I remember, I remember CRTs, but I don't remember them looking how they actually do. You remember it completely differently.
Yeah, and I'm also not gonna go and be like, I've never ever been nostalgic for this. No.
Yeah.
And definitely there was some of that with chiptune when I was first getting into it, and I'm susceptible to those. Remember the 2000s, and then it shows like McDonald's Play Place, the Zany Brainy, and I eat that stuff up. Like, I'm gonna be honest, but that's not the focal point.
Totally.
Right?
Well, because the thing I was gonna say is that it goes so much more beyond nostalgia, where like right now with my work, you're running, at least in an academic setting, you run into like, oh, well, like you're using CRTs and VHS for nostalgia reasons. But 10 years ago, they would say the same thing about people who wanted to shoot films on film.
Right.
Now that argument's over, they know it's about the texture. People who want to shoot on film shoot on film.
Yeah.
And people want to shoot on analog video. They haven't it hasn't, other than video art people, though I feel like the rest of the kind of like academic art world maybe hasn't like caught up to it. But I probably talked about this 100 times, but it's so interesting with me, like you were saying about like when you're growing up with Skrillex and stuff, where I have memories of VHS and some memories of like CRTs, but artists who are coming up now who are learning about and embracing these technologies for the first time, even to the point of like CD players, where they're like, I didn't have this growing up, and this is something I can like, what do you mean I can burn CDs and then I like have this thing? When media is so dead that it becomes this kind of like alien technology, that I think is where some like really interesting artistic uses can be, because they just become tools and they're less about what they meant when they existed in their time. Absolutely.
I think analog video is probably the best example of that, because it is very easy to get. I think one of the things that frustrates me sometimes, because we are in this phase where stuff from the 90s and early 2000s is coming back into pastiche as new people discover it, or old people like us become nostalgic for it. With analog video, it's very easy to immediately connect to the flavor of it, simply because if you have an HDMI and you hook it into a video mixer, you're there. Versus stuff that's low poly, right? You see, I think about those like PlayStation 1 jungle mixes. Right? And I don't and to me, I think that's a great vibe. I love that stuff, but there's why does the PlayStation look like that? Why was all the music jungle? I want something new said about it, or an exploration of those old techniques. Right? I think you either have to come at it from a new perspective, or from like almost like a media archiving perspective.
Yes. Yeah.
And with music and specifically when people want to harken back to a specific aesthetic, I find that oftentimes it feels like it's falling flat just because it's like a pastiche more than it's an actual exploration of that media archaeology. And I think with video mixers, because all the video mixers in the world exist right now already, there is media archaeology as you go into it. Right? There's no way to do what you're doing without that element of media archaeology.
Totally.
Versus if someone is trying to make 8-bit music, there's no necessary determination that you're going to be working with the limitations of the 4-bit sound channel or four channels of sound at all, you know? And it's a lot easier to kind of maybe miss what the devs or the original operators had to do to be clever. And I think that there's a lot of value in, just like learning a guitar, learning how to make a video mixer sing, or learning how to make an old drum machine sing. That is lost when you just sample the sounds and plug them into Ableton.
Have you used, I think it's, I forget what was the official one called Amiga, or was it called Amigo? The old sampler.
The Amiga.
The Amiga?
So the Amiga was a computer. So
yes. Okay.
Yeah, so
have you used the plugin? There's like an Amigo plugin.
Yeah.
That emulates.
So I use a software called Renoise, which is a modern DAW, but it has a tracker interface, just as the Amiga would have had.
Yeah.
And that software does a lot of the things that the Amigo plugin does built in.
Okay.
So that type of sampling and chopping of samples is built into the software. So I didn't need a sampler because I can just put a bit crusher on it and I can just chop it by clicking, and then I can play it across the keyboard is something I
the time dilation, which was like a glitch in a sense, because like now like it wasn't actually slowing stuff down, but it was like
Yeah, so
the chopping it up, and then it became so ubiquitous with jungle music that there's something really interesting about that.
So there was two really important pieces of hardware, right? Early 90s were like 92 through 94. Well, there's three, right? The first was obviously the Commodore Amiga, which was, I think, about $900 in back then money. So the price of a decent PC. The second was that for some reason, PCIe audio cards were really, really cheap, like $30, and they came with the software. So that meant that if you had a bad record player, you could record instrumentals, 1 second of them, put them on a floppy disk, and then load them up in another piece of software. Also at that same time, the first MIDI-enabled PCIe cards happened. Mm-hmm. That stretching sound is a result of the old Akai samplers rather than the Amiga itself. So Cubase 1 was able to talk to the old Akai samplers, and that's where a lot of the jungle came from. So there was people who could afford the Akais, and they would do it on the Akai, and then there was people who couldn't, and they would just do it all in the box with these super tiny a couple KB samples.
Yeah.
Or they had a buddy with an Akai, and then they would record it back to their Amiga and then sequence it off a floppy disk. And so all those sounds were results of just what was laying around, right? There was no deliberate boutique device for stretching the things. It was like, and you hear the story of Chicago Acid too, right? DJ Pierre found a 303 in a pawn shop for $50 because the 303 sucked at making bass sounds.
Yeah, no one wanted it because it didn't work.
Because it didn't, right? They marketed it as like for like crooners. Like the guy would have a bass line and like his guitar and a single mic. I mean, I don't know. And the same with the 606, right? Like those are not light drum sounds. They are all really, really harsh and tinny. So in the same way that kind of came here in Chicago, over in the UK, jungle emerged much the same way. People were pawning off their computers. People were sharing floppy disks of pirated sequencing software, and for 20 quid you could get something that let you record your vinyl, and that was it, you know?
Yeah. It's funny how much history of music and dance music is in Chicago, and how it's like I talked about this in an artist talk actually, where it's like the ghosts of a rave are like all around us. The McLean building at SAIC 112, was it South Michigan or North Michigan?
Yeah.
That used to be one of the first official house clubs, where house for the first time was moving out of basements into specific like clubs where people would go to.
Chicago's most recent contribution to the American music scene is how it got its name. So-called house music was first made in the creators' houses, but it was also performed at clubs called the Warehouse and Powerhouse. However it got its name, it's one of the hottest things going, and as Jay Levine reports, it may only be a matter of time before house musicians become heroes in their own home.
They started playing house music at this Michigan Avenue Hotel and Health Club last summer, and they've been packing them in ever since. It's the first time house has escaped the South Side dance clubs or North Side juice bars for a more upscale audience, though it's still a long way from sweeping the city.
But the fact that like so many people I knew going to SAIC, making dance music as like part of such a big influence on their art, and that is like always existed, even just like in that building before it was an art school. And I think there's stories like that with so many buildings in Chicago, of like, you think about so many historic two flats and the parties that have happened in them that you wouldn't even know, you know?
I mean, think about how many two flats you and I have performed at party-wise, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's nuts. It really, I mean, Chicago, I think, is the best music scene in the United States.
Yeah.
I think so. I think the thing I like the most about the Chicago scene is everyone is willing to make friends.
Yeah.
It feels very unclicky.
Totally.
There's you see a lot of the same players, but at the same time, there's a lot of new folks on every bill. And I think that people who come to the shows are knowledgeable about the music, and they're enthusiastic about it.
Yeah.
And that means that the artists have a lot of freedom to just like go as crazy as they want, because you don't have to play down for a crowd that won't understand it or doesn't get the context or likes this but doesn't like this. Like, people in Chicago specifically are ready to party.
Yeah.
And it's like my favorite thing, you know, and I think that's one of the biggest inspirations to me, is just like seeing people put on shows and seeing new faces come up. I don't want to say through the ranks, but sometimes it does feel that way, you know?
Yeah.
You go to someone and they're like, I just got some gear, I'm just starting out, and then next thing you know, they're coming out of state, and it's like,
that's so cool.
It's so cool, yeah. It really makes me wonderful. And then the old folks or have been doing it for longer, apologies, they're still out there doing their thing too, and they're just getting as much love, and so it really just brings me so much joy. I think number one city. Would not catch me in Los Angeles.
That was one of the best things about like with meeting Joe and doing visuals for Mobcore Records is like that is old school Chicago, original breakcore,
Right.
Chicago, and the fact that like Joe's so awesome. Like I'm still somewhat new to this scene. Like I say that being 5 years in,
Right.
But in the sense of that, like I was in college when like dubstep was first like taking off, and I was friends with a lot of hippies, and so would go to a lot of dubstep shows, but it wasn't really like, it wasn't what really grasped me, and it wasn't until video art that I got more into the rave scene and more into like electronic music. And I've always loved, like, I listen to a lot of rap, so I've always loved heavy 808s, and but it's just so amazing that like, me being an outsider, but my work kind of like corresponding this and having like a genuine interest in it. Like, Joe's embraced me with like open arms and is just like very excited to like have me do visuals at this. And it's really cool seeing that kind of like history of Chicago music. And, Galloping Ghost?
I'm very familiar with the Galloping Ghost arcade, yes.
Did you know that's an old school breakcore spot?
No, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Before now they have too many arcade machines.
Oh, they
but Joe was
definitely do.
telling me is like most of like Mobcore Records and what's known as Chicago breakcore actually comes out of Brookfield, and they had shows at Galloping Ghost, the early breakcore shows.
The craziest thing to me is that I was probably like one handshake away from meeting Cervix like in high school, because so many of the cats who were doing chiptune when I was first discovering chiptune were also hanging out with all the breakcore folks.
Yeah.
Because there used to be a pretty sizable Detroit, Chicago chiptune group.
Yeah.
A lot of the big players on the coasts came from the Midwest originally, and so there was just all this overlap. So it's just great. I love hard dance music, and I love that it's from Chicago. And there's so many other genres. We were talking about, you and I were at a party yesterday, we were talking about C-punk music, also Chicago, born and raised, but that kind of starts to cross in like net label stuff, which is its own totally different music scene. Yeah. Kind of like mid 2010s net label stuff is kind of its own thing. But it did start here in Chicago, probably in a 2-flat.
Yeah. Do you want to go ahead and do the plug for
Sure,
your...
we can rap.
Yeah.
So, I'm Vino Sai. Thank you all for listening. Sid, it's always so good to hang out and talk.
What's your website?
My website is vinosai.bandcamp.com. Also, nfcrecords.bandcamp.com.
All right, yeah, check it out. Thank you all so much for watching. Tune in next week. Heavy Shell TV plays Thursdays at 6:30 p.m., replaying Fridays at 1:30 p.m. So thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.